April Lynn stepped into the grand ballroom, the soft hum of conversation and clinking glasses swirling around her like a delicate storm. The charity gala was a world apart from her usual surroundings, a glittering event hosted in one of the most opulent downtown hotels. The chandeliers overhead scattered light across pristine marble floors, and walls draped in luxurious fabric whispered tales of status and refinement. April's dress, handmade from recycled fabrics dyed in muted earth tones, seemed almost understated here, but it was a symbol of everything she believed in: sustainability and simplicity. As she moved through the room, she could feel the weight of eyes on her, not the admiring kind, but the scrutinizing, judgmental looks of the city's elite. Veronica stood near the entrance, surrounded by her usual circle of impeccably dressed socialites. Veronica's sharp eyes locked on April immediately, a smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. Known for her biting remarks and relentless pride in her wealthy status, she made no effort to hide her disapproval. "Who invited the eco-chic?" Veronica whispered loudly enough for those near her to hear, her voice dripping with disdain. The surrounding guests tittered, their curiosity piqued by this unexpected visitor in what was meant to be a tightly controlled gathering. April's heart quickened, not from excitement, but from the prickling awareness of being treated as an outsider. The low murmurs swelled around her as the clash between what she represented and this circle's vanity became unmistakable. Just as the host announced the start of the evening, Veronica's voice rang out again. "I'm not sure this is the right crowd for someone dressed like that." The spotlight shifted abruptly to April, the room holding its breath. The ballroom's atmosphere thickened with tension as Veronica's laughter subsided and a heavy silence took its place. April stood near the edge of the room, the murmurs and sidelong glances intensifying like a rising tide. She wanted to shrink away, to fade into the shadows, but instead she straightened, drawing a steadying breath. Her dress, carefully made from eco-friendly fabrics, was unlikely to win applause from this crowd, but it symbolized something deeper, a commitment to change. Veronica, perched imperiously near the entrance, relished each pointed whisper and half-smile aimed in April's direction. "Look at her," she hissed to her closest confidant, Marissa, lips twisting into a smirk. "This is a gala for people who belong in the spotlight, people who know what success looks like. Not charity case dressers pretending to be somebody." Her sharp tone was a blade, cutting deeply in its cruelty and intent. Guests nearby tittered and nodded, feeding off Veronica's disdain. Some were downright brash. "Seriously, who let in the thrift store edition?" one man snorted, drawing a few outright laughs. Another woman flicked her blonde hair, her eyes flashing with amusement. "That dress won't get her anywhere here." April felt their contempt like prickling needles against her skin. She hadn't expected warmth, but she'd hoped for respect. The sting was harsher because it was based not on her work or the words she might share tonight, but on her attire, and the values it represented. It was as if she had walked into a fortress built of glittering glass and gold, only to have it shatter around her at the sight of her unfashionable gown. Trying to hold herself together, April turned her attention to Maeve, a soft-spoken woman seated quietly on the fringes of the crowd. Maeve's support was subtle but steady, an encouraging smile, a subtle nod of acknowledgement that stirred a small warmth amid the biting coldness of the rest of the room. "Ignore them," Maeve whispered quietly when their eyes met, "you're here for what matters." But Veronica was relentless. Approaching with the polished stance of a social predator, she leaned closer and spoke sharply, voice dripping with condescension. "I wonder if you truly understand that this event is about celebrating accomplishment, refinement, the kind of elegance we cultivate here. Not social experiment fashion statements." Laughter rippled from her circle, cutting and deliberate. April's throat tightened. She closed her eyes momentarily to steady herself, then opened them with renewed resolve. The idea of fleeing flickered briefly but quickly extinguished. This was her moment to stand, and to speak, even if all eyes were judging her every breath. Before she had a chance to gather her words, a sharply dressed man, one of the gala's organizers, stepped through the crowd. His face wore a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, a carefully constructed mask. "Miss Lin," he said briskly, extending his hand but keeping his distance, "the organizers have requested that you introduce our keynote speaker. It's an important role, and your commitment to the environment is highly valued." His words were layered. What sounded like praise was a carefully veiled attempt to put April squarely in the spotlight, where Veronica's scrutiny could be multiplied many times over. Instinct screamed within April. The invitation was no honor, but a setup for further public humiliation. The thought of standing on stage, with Veronica's eyes boring into her, and the rest of the room waiting to see her stumble, made her stomach coil into knots. She hesitated, reluctant to walk into a trap painted with polite words. But the tenseness around her was electric. The murmurs grew into curious but judgmental whispers about what would happen next. Veronica's smile widened, a show of quiet victory, her lips curled as if savoring the impending spectacle. "You should go," she hissed. "Show everyone what your kind is really about." April's breath caught, but she forced herself forward, her footsteps echoing with uncertainty that morphed into a fragile kind of courage. The polished wooden stage gleamed under the chandelier's light as she stepped up to the microphone. The crowd's voices dimmed to an expectant hush, a collective breath held in suspense. Veronica's eyes locked onto hers, icy and unyielding, as if daring her to fail. The crowd's expressions varied, some skeptical, others amused, a few curious. The whispers, however, refused to fade. Who is she, really? What's her story? Is this some kind of insider joke? April could feel the weight of hundreds of gazes, each one an unspoken question, a silent judgment, an expectation of failure. Her fingers tightened around the microphone's base. The fleeting desire to flee almost won out again, but a distant voice echoed inside her, a memory of late nights spent fighting for change, the stories of polluted rivers and discarded landfills, and communities suffering for the sake of fashion trends. This was more than an outfit. This was a message. For a heartbeat she stood still, searching for words that could cut through the cynicism and ridicule swirling around her like storm clouds. Then, with a voice slow but even, filled with quiet determination, April began. "Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I realize my dress may seem different from what many expect at an event like this. But the fabric you see was made with care, recycled materials, created by artisans who are often overlooked. This dress is not just clothing. It is a statement." Her eyes swept the room, daring them to meet her conviction. A few in the crowd shifted uneasily, some frowning, others intrigued. The tension remained, but a curious energy started to crack through the wall of judgment. "I'm here because our world is facing a crisis not always visible beneath the glitter and chatter of events like this. The fashion industry alone is responsible for an immense amount of pollution and waste, often hidden behind the glamour and excess many here may take for granted." Her voice rose slightly, fueled by passion. "But true elegance isn't about labels or price tags. It's about responsibility, toward our planet, toward the people who make the clothes we wear." A pause. "The dress may look simple, but it embodies respect for the environment and the dignity of workers whose voices are seldom heard." The room was silent, the earlier laughter evaporated like mist. For a startling moment, all eyes were on April, not with scorn, but with attention. Maeve smiled broadly now, whispering, "Yes, April." Even Veronica, caught mid-laugh, faltered. Her mouth twitched as she struggled to regain control, but the shift was undeniable. April pressed on, her nerves transforming into strength. "I have spent years studying the impact of climate change, working with communities devastated by pollution and waste. My passion isn't about fashion itself, it's about protecting the world we share and creating a sustainable future for all." Her gaze was unwavering. "And what I wear tonight is a promise to live by those principles every day." A smattering of applause stirred hesitantly, then grew louder. More guests looked at April with new eyes, recognizing a truth beneath the surface appearance. Some nodded slowly, weighing her commitment against their own carefully curated facades. Veronica's smile vanished completely, replaced by an expression of vexation and disbelief. The air in the room felt electric, the power dynamic shifting. Her circle murmured nervously, unsure whether to side with their leader's spite or with the compelling message delivered in front of them. April's moment on stage was no longer a performance of humiliation, but one of unexpected influence. The realization that she was no longer the outsider but the center of attention and respect brought a quiet, satisfying sense of vindication. Yet with every clap echoing through the ballroom, there lingered a question: how would Veronica respond to losing her grip on this glittering kingdom she so fiercely guarded? More importantly, how far would April's courage take her, and the change she hoped to inspire? The night was far from over, but April's spark had been lit. The room had shifted, and with it, something deeper had begun. The applause echoed through the grand ballroom, reverberating against crystal chandeliers and ornate molding, an unexpected chorus rising to meet April Lynn's words. She stood at the microphone, steady and poised now, the initial hesitation melting into purpose. The glittering crowd, once ready to dismiss her, sat spellbound, their expressions shifting from disdain to surprise. April's heart pounded not with fear but with a fierce clarity. She moved beyond her scripted introduction, her voice firm and sincere. Sustainable fashion isn't just a trend or a fad, she continued. It is a necessary step toward protecting our planet and preserving dignity for those who create what we wear. Imagine a world where every choice we make supports fairness and sustainability. She glanced around, meeting the eyes of guests who moments ago had questioned her place in this room. A hush settled over the ballroom, an attentive silence unlike the murmurs riddled with judgment before. April's speech flowed naturally now, each sentence weaving together facts, personal stories, and calls to action. She spoke of her volunteer work in communities ravaged by toxic waste from factories, where garment workers suffered in silence. She shared statistics about environmental damage wrought by fast fashion, the mountains of discarded clothing and the groundwater polluted by hazardous dyes. But what captivated the room most were the human stories, the families she had met, the children she had seen struggle because of greed and negligence. Veronica shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She was no stranger to social gatherings or control, but watching April command the room with such authenticity unsettled her. She whispered to Marissa, "She's not what I expected." Marissa nodded slightly, eyes wide with surprise. "This is remarkable," a man near the front muttered, his tone betraying amazement. Each revelation from April chipped away at the veneer of skepticism. Guests leaned forward in their seats, drawn in by her passion and eloquence. There was no mockery here, only genuine engagement. As April spoke, she noticed the change not only in the faces around her but also within herself. The earlier anxiety had been replaced by a profound sense of connection. She was no longer the outsider but an empowered voice, bridging two worlds that often remain divided. Her conclusion swelled with hope and determination. We all have a role to play in shaping the future. It begins with choices, in our wardrobes, our values, and in how we support those who build a better world. Tonight, I stand before you not just clothed in recycled fabric but wrapped in conviction. Together, we can redefine elegance and success to include compassion and responsibility. The room erupted in applause, spontaneous and sincere. Hands clapped rhythmically, some stomping in appreciation. Faces that had moments ago been twisted with derision now shined with admiration. Veronica's triumphant smile was wiped away, replaced by a tight-lipped frown. The tide had shifted so suddenly she found herself unmoored. She watched as many guests approached April afterward, eager to compliment and learn more. Marching over to the stage with a small group, Veronica attempted to regain control. "Miss Lynn," she began, voice strained but polite, "quite an unexpected turn this evening. Your message has certainly stirred many in the room." Her words were laced with a mix of bitterness and forced civility. April met her gaze calmly. "Change often feels unexpected, but it's necessary," she replied evenly. I'm grateful for the chance to share what I believe is urgent. Some guests nodded in agreement. One woman, previously part of Veronica's circle, whispered to her friend, "I think we underestimated her." The social dynamics shifted visibly. Veronica's clique fractured as more people gravitated toward April's message and warmth. She had outshone them, not with wealth or style but with knowledge and heart. Later, as the gala continued, April found herself drawn into conversations with influential guests. People who had once whispered behind their hands now sought her opinions on sustainability initiatives. She spoke with eloquence and humility, opening dialogues that felt genuine and promising. Maeve reappeared by her side, smiling brightly. "You did it," she whispered. "You turned this night around." April smiled softly. "It was more than I imagined, but it still feels like just the beginning." Back in the shadows near the entrance, Veronica stood assessing the room with narrowed eyes. The realization settled heavily. Her attempt to belittle April had backfired spectacularly. She had underestimated this woman's strength and intellect, and now she found herself on the outside, watching her carefully constructed world crack. For all her wealth and influence, Veronica knew something had changed irrevocably tonight. The shallow judgments and appearances that had once ruled these events now seemed fragile and insubstantial against April's steady, unwavering truth. April's triumph was not flamboyant or explosive, it was quiet, dignified, and undeniable. She had seized a moment meant to humiliate and transformed it into a powerful statement that united rather than divided. As the evening wore on, whispers of April's speech rippled through the gala and beyond. People shared her message, inspired by a woman who chose courage over conformity. Her presence, her voice, and her values had carved a space where respect grew, and barriers fell away. And in that space, beneath sparkling lights and amidst hushed voices of admiration, April Lynn's journey toward hope and change truly began. As the gala flourished around her, April Lynn found a quiet moment beside a gleaming marble pillar. The buzz of conversations and the gentle melodies of a string quartet filled the air, but within her, a stillness settled, a reflection of how much this evening had shifted. She'd come dressed simply, not out of necessity but by choice, and now the room saw something more than the modestness of her handmade dress. For many guests, April had been a mystery, a stark contrast to the polished refinement sponsored by designer labels and status. Yet now curiosity mingled with admiration. Some sought to understand the woman behind the words and ideas. April turned and saw Maeve approaching, a warm smile playing on her lips. "You held your own up there," Maeve said softly, her eyes sincere. "But it's not just what you said tonight that makes people listen. It's who you are." April nodded, memories rising in her chest like a tide. "I didn't always dress like this," she confessed. "It was a long journey to get here." She looked out toward the ballroom, recalling the path that had led her here, a road marked by choice and conviction. Before she'd become an environmental scientist and activist, April had come from humble beginnings in a small coastal town. Raised by a single mother who worked tirelessly to keep their family afloat, she learned early the value of persistence and integrity. Her first taste of injustice had come witnessing the gradual destruction of the local ecosystem. The rivers her childhood friends had swum in dried up, and the forests her mother once cherished faded under the shadow of industrial negligence. Determined to act, April had studied hard, earning scholarships and working odd jobs to fund her education. She had chosen science because she believed in facts, evidence, and the ability to make real change. Through years of dedication, she became a consultant, advising governments and organizations worldwide on sustainable practices. But none of it was easy. She faced skepticism, resistance, and often invisible walls built by those unwilling to alter the status quo. Her dress tonight embodied that story, the choice to honor the environment, to support ethical artisans, and to live aligned with her beliefs, regardless of the social cost. It was a quiet rebellion against extravagance and hollow fashion, a statement that spoke of substance beyond the surface. Maeve listened intently, her admiration deepening. "You've turned a quiet statement into a loud one," she said. You're changing minds. April sighed softly. It's only a small step. But if each person here considers what I've shared, about their choices, their impact, it could ripple outward. Nearby, Veronica watched from a distance, her gaze unreadable yet tinged with something less certain than before. The social queen-pin had crafted her life on appearances, alliances, and power plays, but April reminded her that influence could take many forms. As the evening unfolded, whispers circulated about April's background, her scientific achievements, her consulting roles on international projects, even her volunteer work in far-flung communities. The narrative that had begun with amusement and skepticism shifted toward respect and fascination. Guests who had once eyed April's dress with disdain now saw it as a badge of principle. Conversations sparked spontaneously, debates about sustainability and corporate responsibility enlivened the room. The once stifling atmosphere softened under the weight of shared concern and new understanding. April's modesty belied the impact she was making, proof that true elegance and leadership could emerge quietly, without flash or fanfare. Later, standing near a balcony overlooking the city skyline, April thought about the contrasts in the room. Wealth and poverty, glamour and grit, privilege and passion, each element intersecting on this single night. She felt grateful that her choice to speak from the heart had resonated, transcending social boundaries. Maeve joined her on the balcony, gazing out at the glittering lights. You changed things tonight, she said simply. April smiled, a flicker of hope in her eyes. Maybe just a little. But it's a start. Behind them, inside the ballroom, whispered conversations swirled. The preconceived notions that had threatened to isolate April were being rewritten through her courage and knowledge. The walls built by privilege and bias began to crack. And beyond that night, the promise lingered, of a future reshaped by empathy, responsibility, and a willingness to listen. April Lynn's simple dress had spoken volumes, revealing a woman whose quiet strength held the power to inspire change. Her story, much like her message, was only beginning, and it held the promise of a world redefined by values that mattered most. The days following the gala rippled with consequences neither Veronica nor April could have fully anticipated. The event, meant to be an evening of glittering success for the city's social elite, had become a turning point. Word of April Lynn's speech, and the way she'd faced down prejudice with poise and passion, spread quickly, carried by whispered conversations, social posts, and news outlets eager to highlight the unexpected star of the night. For Veronica, the aftermath was a series of cold shoulders and whispered critiques. The gala's organizers, sensing the shift in public sentiment, distanced themselves from her sharp judgments and exclusionary attitudes. Invitations she once took for granted dwindled. Sponsors questioned her role in maintaining a welcoming atmosphere, and quietly, her influence within the social circle began to erode. One afternoon, Veronica found herself summoned to a meeting with the gala committee. The tone was measured but firm. Your comments during the event were deemed exclusionary and contrary to the spirit of the gala, one organizer said. We must uphold values of inclusivity going forward. There was no outright reprimand, but the message was unmistakable. Veronica's role would be diminished if she did not change her approach. Sitting alone later, Veronica wrestled with a growing sense of regret. She had underestimated April, dismissing her based on appearance and assumptions. It was an important lesson, one that unsettled her established worldview. Meanwhile, April's life shifted subtly but significantly. Invitations arrived for speaking engagements, collaboration projects, and consultancies with organizations seeking her expertise. Her voice, once confined to specialized circles, now carried broader resonance. She found herself bridging worlds, not just in environmental science but in social advocacy, inspiring others to reconsider their values. One afternoon, sitting in a sunlit cafe with Maeve, April reflected on the whirlwind the past weeks had brought. I never imagined this reception, she admitted. But it shows how much people crave authenticity and guidance. Maeve smiled, stirring her tea. You gave them something real. That's rare. But April remained humble, aware that the journey ahead was extensive. Change on a large scale required patience and persistence beyond natural moments of triumph. Still, the vindication she felt was undeniable. Not because she had publicly won over Veronica, but because her integrity and message had resonated where superficial judgments had failed. Veronica's eventual outreach came quietly. A letter, handwritten, arrived weeks later, expressing regret for her earlier conduct and acknowledging the strength April had displayed. It was not an apology seeking forgiveness, but a recognition of error, an opening, fragile yet honest. April considered the letter carefully before replying, not with condemnation or bitterness, but with grace. She wrote of the importance of growth and understanding, extending a hand without expectation. The two women's interactions remained limited thereafter, but the tension transformed into a tempered respect born from shared humanity and lessons learned. April's campaign for sustainability grew, supported by a wider community that had once excluded her. She continued traveling, advising, and speaking, not to dominate conversations but to invite collaboration and change. The gallery of her life's work expanded with moments like the gala, the crossing of barriers and moments of unexpected connection. One evening, months after the gala, April stood before a new audience, a conference room filled with diverse faces eager for insight. As she spoke of responsibility, choices, and hope, she realized that the victory was never about proving anyone wrong. It was about standing firm in her truth and inspiring others to do the same. The story closed not with dramatic confrontation but with quiet triumph, a testimony to courage, resilience, and the power of authenticity. And now, dear listener, what would you have done if you were in April's place, facing the sharp sting of judgment but holding fast to your convictions? Would you shrink from the spotlight, or would you rise, words ready, heart steady? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If April's journey moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more stories of strength and inspiration. See you in our next story.